Very often the question arises as to whether the purchaser must pay transfer duty on a particular property transaction or whether there is no transfer duty payable because the transaction is in fact a VAT transaction. So I'm going to break it down a bit to clear up some of that confusion. My name is Andre Foster from EXP Realty South Africa. My wife Lydia and I have been real estate agents in Cape Town's northern suburbs since 2005. Please remember to like and subscribe to our channels to make sure you receive future property tips and updates. It can really be quite confusing understanding when VAT is payable on the transfer of immovable property and when transfer duty is payable. It's always an either or. The answer is usually easily determined by looking at the VAT status of the seller. So as a general rule, if the seller is in fact registered for VAT purposes, and specifically for matters relating to the sale of the property that is being sold, then VAT is payable on this transaction. And if VAT is payable, then no transfer duty will be payable by the purchaser. However, if the seller is not registered for VAT purposes, for matters relating to the sale of the property, then transfer duty is payable on the transaction by the purchaser. There are a few technical exceptions to the general rule which a tax advisor could better advise you on. So the other question which arises is that if it is a VATable transaction and VAT is indeed payable, how do we know whether VAT is included in the stated purchase price or not? Once again, as a general rule in South Africa, any purchase price must be VAT inclusive unless stated otherwise. So accordingly, if the transaction is a VAT transaction, then the purchase price will be inclusive of VAT unless the contract specifies that the purchase price is excluding VAT. One must be very careful in calculating the purchase price when the seller is a VAT vendor, as very often the VAT vendor does not take into account that the selling price of the property does include VAT, and then later the seller is upset when he or she discovers that a portion of the purchase price which the seller has received must be paid over to the receiver of revenue by way of a VAT payment. So it is imperative for sellers to keep all this in mind when doing their calculations. Now, from the purchaser's point of view, the fact that the purchase price includes VAT and the purchaser does not have to pay transfer duty should mean that the purchaser should be willing to pay a slightly higher price for the property being purchased, as effectively the purchaser is not paying transfer duty and is therefore getting the amount which he or she would have paid on transfer duty as a discount on the purchase price for the property. Okay, now, if the sale of the property is one which is a VAT transaction, and the purchaser is registered for VAT purposes as well, then the purchaser is entitled to claim the VAT, which forms part of the purchase price of the property, as a VAT input. This effectively means that the purchaser will get a credit for this amount from the receiver of revenue on the purchaser's next VAT return. However, the receiver of revenue may, of course, conduct a VAT audit on the purchaser before allowing this input. And this will often be the case if there are monies that the receiver actually has to pay out to the purchaser. Now, if the purchaser is a VAT vendor but the seller is not registered for VAT, then the purchaser is still entitled to claim the transfer duty which the purchaser has paid on the transfer of the property as a VAT input on his next VAT return. So effectively, therefore, the purchaser will recover the amount of the transfer duty from the receiver of revenue. Again, this will be by way of a claim for a VAT input on the next VAT return. And again, the receiver of revenue may decide to audit the same prior to allowing the claim or paying a refund. Normally, the receiver of revenue will not allow the claim unless he has received proof that the transfer duty has actually taken place and that transfer duty has been paid. Another thing to keep in mind is that in the event that the property forms part of a business and the business is sold as a going concern, then if both the purchaser and the seller are registered for VAT purposes, VAT will still be payable, but the transaction could be zero rated. In other words, effectively no VAT or transfer duty would be payable on this transaction. To qualify for this, however, the assets which are necessary to carry on the enterprise must also be disposed of by the seller to the purchaser, and the enterprise must be an ongoing income earning activity on the effective date of the sale. So in such cases, it would be wise to include a clause along those lines in the contract of the sale of the business, just to ensure that the receiver of revenue will in fact agree that the VAT in the transaction should be zero rated. So, in summary, although the question as to whether VAT or transfer duty is payable often presents problems to the layperson. In actual fact, it is a question which can be easily determined, relatively easily, by looking at the status of the seller, as I mentioned before. So effectively, the status of the seller determines whether VAT is payable or not, and the status of the purchaser determines whether or not the purchaser can recover the VAT or the transfer duty from the receiver as a VAT input on his next VAT return. I hope you found this information helpful. Feel free to reach out to us for further assistance or with any additional questions you may have. If we cannot answer them, we will direct you to someone who can. Also, to stay updated in future, please like and subscribe to all our channels on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course TikTok. You can also visit our website www.propla.co.za, which features a frequently asked questions section that answers many property related questions. And if you need any advice, please get in touch. We'd love to chat with you. Or if you're considering selling your property, let us get together and discuss a customized marketing plan tailored to your specific needs. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, and God bless.